In the mountains of Afghanistan, where the thin air carries both prayers and gunfire, a single radio transmission would change everything. Base, this is Medic Thompson. I have 37 wounded. Repeat, 37 wounded. We need immediate evacuation. The voice crackled through static, calm yet urgent, as if discussing the weather rather than a battlefield catastrophe. What followed in the next 18 hours would become legend among military circles, not for its glory, but for its impossible mathematics. One medic, 37 wounded soldiers, no backup, and a commander racing against time through enemy territory who had arrived to find an empty battlefield and a story that defied belief. This is that story. This is how Sergeant Maria Thompson, a 28-year-old combat medic from Ohio, turned a military disaster into a miracle that would echo through the halls of the Pentagon and change military protocol forever. But it began with a single mistake, a convoy that took the wrong turn in a valley that wasn't supposed to exist on any map. The morning sun painted the Afghan mountains in shades of gold and amber as Convoy Delta 7 made its way through the winding mountain pass. Sergeant Maria Thompson sat in the back of the third Humvee, her medical kit secured beside her, watching the landscape roll by through bulletproof glass. The convoy consisted of 42 soldiers, their mission simple: deliver medical supplies to Forward Operating Base Crimson, then return to base before nightfall. Maria had been a combat medic for 6 years, long enough to know that simple missions rarely stayed simple. She checked her watch. 0847 hours. They were making good time through the Korangal Valley, a region that had seen its share of conflict but had been relatively quiet for the past 3 months. The intelligence reports suggested clear roads ahead, minimal civilian traffic, and no enemy activity in the area. Staff Sergeant Jake Morrison, the convoy commander, rode in the lead vehicle with his GPS unit and detailed maps spread across his lap. Morrison was a by-the-book soldier, meticulous in his planning and execution. He had led dozens of convoys through these mountains without incident. His reputation for bringing everyone home safely was well-earned and widely respected among the troops. The convoy moved in standard formation, 2 Humvees up front, followed by the supply truck, then 2 more Humvees bringing up the rear. Each vehicle maintained precise spacing, and the gunners stayed alert in their turrets, scanning the rocky outcroppings and sparse vegetation for any signs of trouble. The radio chatter was minimal and professional, just routine position reports every 15 minutes. As they approached Checkpoint Alpha 3, Morrison noticed something odd about the road markers. The Afghan government had been updating road signs in the region, and several new markers had appeared since their last convoy run 2 weeks ago. One sign, written in both Pashto and English, indicated a route designation that didn't match his maps. Morrison frowned, studying the GPS coordinates against his paper maps. Delta 7-1 to all units. Morrison's voice came over the radio. We have a discrepancy in route markers ahead. Stand by for navigation check. The convoy slowed to a crawl as Morrison consulted with his navigator, Corporal Kevin Chen. Chen was known for his exceptional map-reading skills and had never led a convoy astray. Together, they examined the GPS unit, which showed their current position as being exactly where they should be. However, the road ahead split into 2 directions, something that wasn't indicated on any of their maps. Sir, the GPS shows we should continue straight, Chen reported, pointing to the electronic display. But this new sign suggests taking the left fork for continued access to FOB Crimson. Morrison made a decision that would haunt him for years to come. The Afghan road crews had been improving infrastructure in the region, and new routes were being established regularly. Local intelligence often lagged behind these developments. The sign appeared official and recent. Against his usual protocol of sticking strictly to predetermined routes, Morrison decided to trust the new signage. All units, we're taking the left fork as indicated by local road markers. Maintain formation and stay alert. The convoy turned left onto what appeared to be a well-maintained gravel road that wound deeper into the mountains. The landscape began to change subtly. The vegetation became sparser, the rock formations more jagged and imposing. Maria noticed that the radio traffic with base command was becoming more intermittent, likely due to the increased elevation and surrounding mountains interfering with signal transmission. For the first hour after the turn, everything seemed normal. The road was actually in better condition than their original route, and they were making excellent time. The soldiers began to relax slightly, with some quiet conversation resuming in the vehicles. Maria used the time to review her medical protocols and check her equipment. She had enough supplies to handle minor injuries for the entire convoy, plus emergency trauma care for up to 8 severely wounded soldiers. It was Specialist Tommy Rodriguez in the rearguard who first noticed they weren't alone. His sharp eyes caught the glint of sunlight reflecting off something metallic in the rocks about 200 meters to their right. He immediately radioed the observation forward. Delta 75 to lead element. Possible metallic reflection, bearing 090, distance 200 meters. Morrison ordered the convoy to increase speed while maintaining formation. Standard protocol dictated moving through potential ambush zones as quickly as possible rather than stopping to investigate. However, as they rounded the next bend, the road ahead narrowed significantly, forcing them to slow down. That's when the first RPG streaked across their path. The explosion rocked the lead vehicle, but Morrison's driver maintained control. "Contact front! Contact front!" Morrison shouted into his radio. "All units, combat formation, return fire!" What followed was chaos in its purest form. The convoy had driven into a carefully prepared ambush site. Enemy fighters had positioned themselves on both sides of the narrow road, creating a deadly crossfire zone. The sound of automatic weapons fire filled the air, punctuated by the distinctive whistle and boom of rocket-propelled grenades. Maria felt her training kick in immediately. She grabbed her medical kit and prepared to move to wherever she would be needed most. The Humvee she was riding in took several hits, spiderwebbing the bulletproof glass but not penetrating the armored passenger compartment. The battle was intense, but brief. Morrison's soldiers were well trained and responded with overwhelming firepower. Within 20 minutes, the enemy fire had ceased entirely. However, the damage was extensive. The lead vehicle had taken a direct hit from an RPG and was completely disabled. The supply truck had multiple punctures in its tires and radiator. Most critically, 37 soldiers had sustained various levels of injury from shrapnel, gunshot wounds, and the concussive effects of nearby explosions. Morrison himself had been struck by shrapnel in his left shoulder and was bleeding heavily when he made the radio call that would define the rest of the mission. "Base, this is Delta 71. We have suffered casualties and are immobilized. Request immediate medical evacuation and reinforcement." The response from base command was immediate but devastating. "Delta 71, unable to locate your position. You are not on any recognized route. Provide GPS coordinates for extraction." Morrison looked at his GPS unit with growing horror. The device showed their location as being in an area marked as unmapped territory on their military charts. Somehow, they had driven into a region that wasn't properly documented in their navigation systems. Chen frantically tried to triangulate their position using landmarks, but the mountain peaks around them didn't match anything on their topographical maps. Base GPS shows coordinates 34.6425 north, 70.1234 east. Requesting confirmation of position. After several minutes that felt like hours, Base Command responded with the news that would change everything. "Delta 71, those coordinates place you approximately 40 kilometers northwest of your intended route. Nearest extraction point is 6 hours by ground. Medical evacuation helicopter cannot reach your position due to elevation and enemy air defense reports in that sector." Maria had been moving from soldier to soldier, providing emergency medical care and assessing the severity of injuries. She had 7 soldiers with critical wounds that required immediate surgery, 15 with serious but stable injuries, and another 15 with minor wounds that still needed medical attention. Her medical supplies were adequate for short-term stabilization, but several of the critical patients would not survive a 6-hour journey over rough mountain terrain. Morrison, despite his own injury, was coordinating with Base Command to establish the fastest possible rescue route. The nearest road suitable for evacuation vehicles was 4 kilometers away through difficult terrain. Moving 37 wounded soldiers that distance would require multiple trips and would take most of the day. "Sir," Maria approached Morrison with her casualty assessment. "I have 7 critical patients who won't survive a 4-kilometer movement to the extraction point. They need surgery within the next 2 hours, or we're going to start losing people." Morrison stared at the tactical display on his GPS unit, calculating distances and time requirements. Even if the evacuation convoy left immediately, it would be late afternoon before they could establish a secure route to the convoy's position. By then, it would be too late for the most severely wounded soldiers. That's when Maria made a decision that would echo through military history. "Sir, request permission to establish a field hospital at this position and begin emergency surgery."
Morrison looked at her with surprise.
Field surgery was typically performed only by highly trained military doctors in established facilities, not by combat medics in active combat zones. "Sergeant, you're not trained for complex surgical procedures." "No, sir. But I am trained for emergency trauma intervention. If I can stabilize the critical patients here and now, they'll survive the movement to proper medical facilities." Morrison realized he had no other choice. The alternative was watching his soldiers die while waiting for evacuation that might not arrive in time. Permission granted, Sergeant. Do whatever you need to do. Maria immediately began converting the disabled supply truck into an improvised operating theater. She had the soldiers move boxes of medical supplies to create a sterile workspace and set up portable lighting systems. Working with remarkable efficiency, she began what would become an 18-hour marathon of continuous medical care that would save every single life under her responsibility. As she prepared for her first emergency surgery, Maria had no way of knowing that Morrison had already sent a priority message to Base Command requesting immediate dispatch of their most experienced rescue commander. Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Hayes had built a reputation for impossible rescues throughout her 15-year career. She was already loading her vehicles and planning the fastest possible route to reach the stranded convoy. But Hayes was 6 hours away, driving through increasingly difficult terrain, while Maria was beginning emergency surgery with only basic field medical equipment and the absolute determination to bring every soldier home alive. Maria Thompson had performed emergency medical procedures in combat zones before, but nothing had prepared her for what she was about to attempt. Using the back of the disabled supply truck as her operating theater, she had created as sterile an environment as possible under the circumstances. The afternoon sun provided natural lighting, supplemented by battery-powered LED units that cast harsh but adequate illumination across her improvised surgical field. Her first patient was Private First Class Danny Kim, a 19-year-old from California who had taken shrapnel to the abdomen. Maria could see immediately that he had internal bleeding and possibly damaged organs. In a normal medical facility, this would require a full surgical team and sophisticated equipment. Here, she had basic surgical instruments, field anesthetics, and her 6 years of intensive medical training.
Kim, can you hear me?
Maria asked as she administered local anesthetic and began preparing for the procedure. Yes, ma'am. Am I going to make it? Kim's voice was weak but determined. You're going to be fine. I'm going to take care of this, and then we're going to get you home. Maria had learned early in her career that confidence, even when she didn't feel it, was often as important as medical skill in keeping patients alive. Working with steady hands despite the stress, Maria began the delicate process of locating and controlling the internal bleeding. She had performed this procedure in training dozens of times, but never under such circumstances. Each movement had to be precise, as she had limited supplies for mistakes. While Maria worked on Kim, the other soldiers had organized themselves into an efficient support system. Those with minor injuries served as assistants, helping to monitor patients, manage medical supplies, and maintain communication with Base Command. Morrison, despite his own shoulder wound, coordinated the overall operation and maintained security watches in case of additional enemy activity. Specialist Jennifer Walsh, who had training as a veterinary technician in civilian life, proved invaluable as Maria's primary assistant. The bleeding is controlled, Maria announced after 45 minutes of careful work. We need to close and move to the next patient. Her second critical patient was Sergeant Mike Torres, who had suffered severe trauma to his right leg from an RPG explosion. The leg was still attached, but the damage was extensive. In a civilian hospital, amputation might have been the safest option. However, Maria was determined to save the limb if possible. Torres, stay with me. We're going to fix this leg and get you back on your feet, Maria said as she began the complex procedure of reconstructing damaged blood vessels and stabilizing fractured bones. The work was painstaking and dangerous. One mistake could result in permanent disability or death. Maria had to rely entirely on her training and instincts, as she had no access to X-ray equipment or other diagnostic tools. She worked by feel and observation, using techniques she had learned but never practiced under such extreme conditions. Meanwhile, Lieutenant Colonel Hayes was making remarkable progress toward their position. She had assembled a convoy of 3 vehicles with her best rescue specialists and was driving through mountain passes at speeds that would normally be considered reckless. Hayes had studied the GPS coordinates provided by Morrison and had identified a route that could cut the travel time from 6 hours to 4 if they could navigate some particularly challenging terrain. Command, this is Rescue 1. Hayes radio back to base. We are making better time than projected. Current ETA to stranded convoy is approximately 3 hours. Request medical helicopter standby at extraction coordinates. Base Command responded with concerning news. Rescue 1. Be advised that weather conditions are deteriorating in your area. Medical helicopter may not be available due to high winds and visibility issues. Hayes gritted her teeth and pushed her convoy harder. If medical evacuation wasn't available, she would need to transport all the wounded soldiers back to base by ground convoy, a journey that could take most of the night over difficult mountain roads. Back at the ambush site, Maria was working on her third critical patient when she encountered a complication that tested her skills to their absolute limit. Staff Sergeant Robert Chen, the convoy navigator, had suffered what appeared to be a traumatic brain injury from the concussive blast of a nearby explosion. He was conscious but showing signs of increasing intracranial pressure, a condition that could be fatal without immediate intervention. Maria had learned about emergency cranial procedures in advanced combat medicine training, but she had never performed one outside of a fully equipped medical facility. The procedure required drilling a small hole in the skull to relieve pressure on the brain, a technique that was extremely dangerous in the best of circumstances and potentially fatal if performed incorrectly. "Thompson, what's Chen's status?" Morrison asked, approaching the improvised medical station. "Sir, he has increasing intracranial pressure. Without intervention, he'll lose consciousness within the hour and likely won't survive transport to proper medical facilities." Morrison understood the implications immediately. "What do you need to do?" "I need to perform an emergency cranial decompression procedure. It's risky, but it's his only chance." Morrison nodded grimly. "Do it." Maria spent 15 minutes carefully preparing for the procedure, reviewing every detail of the training she had received. She explained the situation to Chen, who was still conscious enough to understand and give his consent. "Doc, if you think it'll work, do it," Chen said weakly. "I trust you." The procedure took nearly an hour and required every bit of Maria's training and concentration. Working with a small drill from the convoy's toolkit that she had sterilized as thoroughly as possible, she carefully created a small opening in Chen's skull to relieve the dangerous pressure on his brain. Throughout the procedure, she monitored his vital signs and neurological responses, making minute adjustments based on his reactions. When she finally completed the procedure, Chen's symptoms began to improve almost immediately. His pupils returned to normal size, and his responses became more coherent. It was a complete success under impossible circumstances. While Maria worked on the most critical cases, the other wounded soldiers were receiving care from their fellow troops. The convoy had established an efficient triage system, with the most severely injured receiving priority attention, while those with minor wounds helped care for others. Private Johnson, who had suffered only minor shrapnel wounds to his arms, had appointed himself as Maria's supply coordinator. "Doc, we're running low on gauze and antiseptic. What are your priorities for the remaining supplies?" Maria looked at her remaining patients and calculated her needs. "Save the antiseptic for the remaining surgical cases. We can improvise with torn cloth for bandages if necessary." By late afternoon, Maria had successfully treated all 7 critical patients. Each procedure had required techniques at the very edge of her training, but she had managed to stabilize every soldier. The other wounded troops had received appropriate care, and the entire convoy was now in stable condition for transport. However, their situation remained precarious. They were still stranded in unmapped territory with limited supplies and no immediate evacuation available. Morrison continued to coordinate with Base Command, but the promised rescue convoy had encountered unexpected delays. "Base, this is Delta 7-1. Request status update on rescue convoy." Delta 7-1. Rescue 1 convoy has encountered terrain difficulties and is running approximately 1 hour behind schedule. Current ETA is 4 hours from your position. Morrison calculated the remaining daylight and realized they would be spending the night in the mountains. "Roger, Base. We will establish defensive positions and await rescue convoy arrival." As evening approached, Maria continued monitoring her patients and managing their care. The soldiers had organized themselves into security watches and had established a defensive perimeter around their position. Despite their circumstances, morale remained surprisingly high, largely due to the successful medical treatment and the knowledge that rescue was on the way. Lieutenant Colonel Hayes, meanwhile, was pushing her convoy through increasingly difficult terrain. One of her vehicles had suffered mechanical problems on a steep mountain slope, forcing her to redistribute personnel and continue with only 2 vehicles. The delay was frustrating, but she remained determined to reach the stranded convoy before dawn. "Rescue 1 to Base Command. We have overcome mechanical difficulties and are continuing toward objective. Be advised that extraction may require multiple trips due to the number of casualties and difficult terrain." As night fell over the mountains, Maria prepared for what would be a long night of continuous patient monitoring. She had accomplished the impossible, saving 37 wounded soldiers with basic field medical equipment. But the mission would not be complete until every soldier was safely evacuated. The wounded soldiers, despite their injuries, had organized themselves to assist with security and support functions. Those who could walk took turns on guard duty, while others helped maintain communication equipment and manage supplies. The convoy had become a tight-knit unit, focused on survival and mutual support. Morrison, fighting exhaustion from blood loss and pain from his shoulder wound, maintained command and coordination responsibilities throughout the night. He knew that Hayes was still hours away and that they needed to remain alert for possible enemy activity. "Listen up, everyone," Morrison addressed the group as darkness settled over their position. "We've accomplished something incredible today. Every one of our people is alive and stable. Rescue is on the way, and we're going home together. Stay alert, help each other, and we'll get through this." Maria smiled as she checked on her patients one final time before settling into what would be a few hours of much-needed rest. She had proven that extraordinary medical care was possible even under the most challenging circumstances. But she had no idea that her actions were already being discussed at the highest levels of military command, or that Lieutenant Colonel Hayes was racing through the night with a determination that matched her own commitment to bringing every soldier home safely. The Afghan night brought a bone-chilling cold that seeped through even the best military gear. Maria Thompson moved quietly between her patients, checking vital signs and adjusting blankets in the improvised field hospital she had created from the damaged convoy vehicles. The portable heaters they carried provided some warmth, but conserving fuel meant using them sparingly. Private Kim, her first surgical patient, was showing remarkable improvement. His color had returned to normal, and his vital signs were stable. "How are you feeling, Kim?" Maria whispered, not wanting to disturb the other sleeping soldiers. "Much better, Doc. The pain is manageable. You really saved my life out here." Maria smiled and moved on to check Sergeant Torres, whose leg reconstruction had been her most challenging surgery. The circulation in his leg remained good, and there were no signs of infection developing. Torres was awake, staring up at the stars that shone brilliantly in the clear mountain air. "Can't sleep either?" Maria asked softly. "Too much adrenaline, I think. Plus, I keep thinking about how close we came to losing people today. If you hadn't been here..." Torres trailed off. "But I was here, and everyone is going to be fine. That's what matters." Staff Sergeant Chen, her traumatic brain injury patient, was sleeping peacefully. His neurological signs remained stable, and the emergency cranial procedure had been completely successful. Maria allowed herself a moment of quiet pride. In 12 hours, she had performed medical procedures that would challenge doctors in fully equipped hospitals. Meanwhile, Lieutenant Colonel Hayes was navigating her convoy through what could only be described as a nightmare of mountain terrain. The road, if it could even be called that, was little more than a rocky trail that wound between massive boulders and around precipitous drops. Her remaining two vehicles crept forward at walking pace, their headlights cutting through the darkness to reveal obstacles that seemed designed to stop any rescue attempt. "Sir, we're not going to make it through this section with the vehicles," Sergeant First Class Maria Rodriguez called from the passenger seat of the lead vehicle. Rodriguez was Hayes' most experienced driver and had navigated some of the worst terrain Afghanistan had to offer. Hayes studied the path ahead through night vision equipment. A massive rock slide had partially blocked the narrow mountain road, leaving barely enough space for a person to squeeze through on foot. The vehicles would have to be abandoned. "All right, we continue on foot. Grab medical supplies and emergency equipment. Leave everything else." The rescue team consisted of Hayes, 4 medics, and 2 communication specialists. They loaded themselves with medical supplies, water, and emergency gear, then began the treacherous hike through the mountains. According to their GPS, the stranded convoy was still 3 kilometers away, but those 3 kilometers included some of the most difficult terrain in the region. Back at the ambush site, Morrison had organized the able-bodied soldiers into 4-hour security watches. Despite their isolation and the challenging circumstances, the soldiers maintained discipline and focus. The convoy had become a small fortress, with defensive positions established around the perimeter and clear fields of fire covering all approaches. Specialist Walsh, Maria's veterinary technician assistant, had proven invaluable throughout the night. She helped monitor the critical patients and assisted with medication administration. "Doc, Torres is asking for something for pain. His leg is bothering him." Maria checked her medical supplies. Pain medication was one of their most limited resources, and she needed to balance immediate comfort with long-term needs. "Give him one of the remaining morphine injections. We should have enough to last until rescue arrives." The radio crackled to life with an update from Base Command. "Delta 7-1, this is Base Command. Be advised that Rescue 1 convoy has encountered terrain obstacles and is proceeding on foot. ETA to your position is now approximately 4 hours." Morrison acknowledged the transmission and updated his soldiers. "Rescue team is hiking in on foot. They'll be here before dawn. Everyone stay alert and maintain security protocols." As the night progressed, Maria found herself reflecting on the extraordinary events of the day. She had joined the military as a combat medic because she wanted to help soldiers, but she had never imagined she would be called upon to perform such complex medical procedures under such extreme conditions. Her training had prepared her well, but the actual experience had pushed her far beyond anything covered in medical school or military instruction. Around midnight, one of the perimeter guards reported movement in the rocks above their position. Morrison immediately called for silent alert, and every able-bodied soldier took defensive positions. For 30 minutes, they watched and listened, but no further movement was detected. The mountains were home to various wildlife, and it was likely just animals moving through their territory. False alarm, Morrison finally announced. Return to normal watch rotation, but stay alert. Lieutenant Colonel Hayes and her team were making steady progress through the mountains despite the challenging terrain. Hayes had spent 15 years in the military and had led rescue operations in some of the most dangerous regions of the world, but this mission was testing even her considerable skills and experience. "Ma'am, we're about halfway to their position," reported Specialist Thompson, the team's navigation expert. "The terrain ahead looks more manageable." Hayes checked her watch. It was 0200 hours, and they had been hiking for 4 hours. Her team was tired but determined. Each of them understood that 37 wounded soldiers were depending on their successful arrival. "Take a 10-minute rest, then we push hard for the final approach. I want to be there before dawn." Back at the convoy position, Maria was dealing with the new medical challenge. Private Jackson, one of the soldiers with minor injuries, was developing signs of shock, possibly delayed reaction to the stress and trauma of the ambush. His blood pressure was dropping, and he was becoming disoriented. "Jackson, look at me. You're going to be okay. This is just your body reacting to the stress of today." Maria administered IV fluids and positioned him to improve circulation. "Walsh, I need you to monitor his vitals every 15 minutes. The situation reminded Maria that trauma affected soldiers in many different ways, and symptoms could develop hours or even days after the initial incident. She made a mental note to recommend psychological evaluation for all convoy members once they returned to base. As the night wore on, the temperature continued to drop. Maria redistributed blankets and moved some of the wounded soldiers closer to the portable heaters. Hypothermia was a real concern, especially for those who had lost blood during the ambush. Morrison approached Maria around 0300 hours. "How are our people holding up?" "Everyone is stable. Jackson developed some delayed shock symptoms, but I've got him stabilized. The critical patients are doing remarkably well. All things considered, we're in good shape for evacuation." Morrison nodded. His shoulder wound was causing him considerable pain, but he had refused pain medication to maintain clear judgment for command decisions. "The rescue team should be here within the next few hours. Once we get everyone to proper medical facilities, you're going to receive some serious recognition for what you've accomplished here." Maria shook her head. "I just did my job, sir. Any combat medic would have done the same thing." "No, Thompson. What you did today was extraordinary. You saved 37 lives with basic field equipment. That's going into the history books." Meanwhile, Hayes and her rescue team had reached a ridge overlooking the valley where the convoy was stranded. Through night vision equipment, she could see the vehicles and the defensive positions the soldiers had established. Everything appeared calm and organized. "There they are," Hayes announced to her team. 2 more kilometers of descent and we'll be there." The final approach was treacherous as the team had to navigate steep slopes and loose rock that could easily trigger an avalanche. Each step had to be carefully placed, and they used ropes to secure their descent in the most dangerous sections. At 0500 hours, just as the eastern sky began to show the first hints of dawn, Hayes and her rescue team reached the convoy position. They were met by Morrison, who despite his injuries had been watching their approach for the past hour. "Lieutenant Colonel Hayes, welcome to our little mountain resort," Morrison said with tired humor. Hayes immediately assessed the situation and was amazed by what she found. The wounded soldiers were organized, alert, and in remarkably good condition considering their circumstances. The medical care they had received was clearly exceptional. "Where's your medic?" Hayes asked. Morrison pointed toward the supply truck where Maria was checking on her patients. "Sergeant Thompson. She's been performing miracles for the past 18 hours." Hayes approached Maria, who was administering morning medications to her critical patients. "Sergeant Thompson, I'm Lieutenant Colonel Hayes. I understand you've had quite a night." Maria looked up from her patient care, surprised to see the rescue team had arrived. "Yes, ma'am. All patients are stable and ready for evacuation." Hayes looked around at the improvised medical facility and the organized care system Maria had established. In her 15 years of military service, she had never seen anything quite like it. "Sergeant, I need to understand exactly what you've accomplished here. I'm going to need detailed reports for my superiors. As the sun rose over the Afghan mountains, painting the peaks in brilliant gold and orange, Hayes began the complex process of evacuating 37 wounded soldiers from terrain that had been considered nearly inaccessible. But she was beginning to realize that the real story of this mission wasn't the rescue operation itself. It was the extraordinary medical care that had made the rescue possible. Maria Thompson had turned a potential disaster into a remarkable success story, and word of her achievements was already spreading through military communication networks. By the time the evacuation was complete, her actions would be known at the highest levels of military command, and changes to combat medical protocols would already be under discussion. But for now, Maria simply focused on preparing her patients for the journey home, unaware that she had already become a legend in the making. Dawn broke over the mountains with the kind of spectacular beauty that made the danger and hardship of the previous 18 hours seem almost surreal. Lieutenant Colonel Hayes surveyed the scene before her with growing amazement. The stranded convoy had been transformed into an efficient medical station that would have impressed doctors at a major trauma center. Maria Thompson was moving between patients with the calm efficiency of someone who had been working in emergency medicine for decades, rather than performing field surgery for the first time. Each of her critical patients showed clear signs of improvement, and the entire medical operation displayed a level of organization that Hayes had rarely seen even in established military hospitals. "Sergeant Thompson," Hayes called, "I need to understand your evacuation requirements. Which patients need immediate helicopter transport, and which can handle ground transportation?" Maria consulted the notebook where she had been tracking patient status throughout the night. "Ma'am, I have 3 patients who should be airlifted if possible. Private Kim with abdominal surgery, Sergeant Torres with the complex leg reconstruction, and Staff Sergeant Chen with the traumatic brain injury. The others are stable for ground transport, but will need proper medical vehicles with life support equipment." Hayes nodded and immediately got on her radio. "Base Command, this is Rescue 1. We need immediate medical helicopter dispatch to our position. We have 3 critical patients requiring air evacuation and 34 additional wounded requiring ground medical transport." The response from Base Command was not encouraging. Rescue 1. Weather conditions have deteriorated further. Medical helicopter is grounded due to high winds and visibility issues. All evacuation must be by ground transportation. Hayes studied the terrain around their position and realized the magnitude of the challenge ahead. The Rocky Mountain road they had abandoned their vehicles on was completely unsuitable for medical transport. They would need to find an alternative route, or somehow get proper medical vehicles to this position. "Thompson, how long can your critical patients survive transport over rough terrain?" Maria considered the question carefully. Each of her critical patients had stabilized, that the stress of difficult transportation could easily reverse their progress. With proper monitoring and support, they can handle several hours of careful transport, but will need to stop frequently for medical checks. Morrison approached the 2 officers, moving stiffly due to his shoulder wound. "Ma'am, I've been studying our maps and I think there might be a solution. There's an old mining road about 2 kilometers north of here that connects to the main highway system. It's rough, but it should be passable for proper vehicles." Hayes examined Morrison's map and saw the route he was suggesting. The mining road was marked as abandoned, but satellite imagery suggested it was still intact. "How long to move all our people to that location?" "With the number of wounded we have, probably 4 to 6 hours of careful movement." Hayes made her decision. "We'll move everyone to the mining road and establish an evacuation point there. I'll coordinate with Base Command to get proper medical vehicles to meet us." The evacuation began with careful preparation of each patient for transport. Maria worked with Hayes' medical team to establish protocols for moving critically injured soldiers over difficult terrain. Each patient would need to be carried on improvised stretchers, with medical personnel monitoring their condition throughout the journey. Private Kim, Maria's first surgical patient, was conscious and alert despite his serious injuries. "Doc, am I going to slow everyone down? Maybe you should leave me here and send help later." "Absolutely not," Maria replied firmly. "We're all going home together, and you're going to be just fine. The surgery was completely successful, and you're healing well." The soldiers organized themselves into carrying teams, with the less severely wounded helping to transport those who couldn't walk. Morrison established security teams to guard the flanks during movement, as they would be vulnerable to attack while moving slowly through open terrain. Sergeant Torres, whose leg had been reconstructed in Maria's marathon surgical session, insisted on trying to walk with assistance rather than being carried. "I can make it, Doc. Save the stretchers for people who really need them." Maria examined his leg and found that the repairs were holding well. "You can try walking with support, but if there's any sign of problems, you go on a stretcher immediately." No arguments. The procession began moving north through the rocky terrain toward the abandoned mining road. Hayes led the way with her navigation equipment, while Maria moved along the line of wounded soldiers, constantly checking on their condition and adjusting their care as needed. The movement was slow and careful, with frequent stops to rest and check on the wounded. Several times, patients had to be repositioned or given additional medical attention. Maria found herself running back and forth along the line, addressing medical issues while helping coordinate the overall movement. After 3 hours of steady progress, they reached the abandoned mining road. Hayes was pleased to find that the road was in better condition than expected and would definitely support medical evacuation vehicles. She immediately radioed their new position to Base Command. Base Command, this is Rescue 1. We have reached evacuation point at coordinates 34.6891 north, 70.1456 east. Road is suitable for medical vehicles. Request immediate dispatch of medical evacuation convoy. The response was encouraging. Rescue 1. Medical evacuation convoy is already en route to your new position. ETA is approximately 2 hours. Hayes shared the good news with the soldiers and morale improved significantly. They had successfully moved 37 wounded soldiers to a proper evacuation point, and rescue was finally within reach. Maria used the waiting time to conduct thorough medical examinations of all her patients. The movement had been stressful, but everyone had tolerated it well. Her 3 critical patients showed no signs of deterioration, and several of the less seriously wounded soldiers were actually feeling better due to improved circulation from the physical activity. Ma'am, Specialist Walsh approached Hayes. I think you need to understand what Sergeant Thompson accomplished yesterday. I've worked with veterinarians in civilian life, and I've never seen surgical procedures like what she performed under these conditions. Hayes was beginning to appreciate the full scope of Maria's achievement. What specific procedures did she perform? She performed emergency abdominal surgery to control internal bleeding, complex orthopedic reconstruction of severely damaged leg bones and blood vessels, and emergency cranial decompression to relieve brain pressure. All of this with basic field medical equipment in an active combat zone. Hayes made detailed notes for her after-action report. What Maria had accomplished would need to be documented and studied by military medical authorities. The procedures she had performed were typically done only in major hospitals, with full surgical teams and sophisticated equipment. As they waited for the evacuation convoy, Morrison gathered his soldiers for a brief ceremony.
Everyone, I want you to know that what we accomplished here is going to be remembered for a long time.
We faced impossible circumstances and brought everyone through alive. That's due to exceptional teamwork and the extraordinary medical care provided by Sergeant Thompson. The soldiers applauded, many with tears in their eyes. They had formed a bond during their ordeal that would last for the rest of their lives. At 1400 hours, the medical evacuation convoy arrived at their position. Hayes was impressed by the response. 3 fully equipped ambulances, 2 medical support vehicles, and a security escort of 4 armed Humvees. The medical teams immediately began loading patients and providing advanced care. Captain Jennifer Walsh, the lead medical officer with the evacuation convoy, sought out Maria immediately. Sergeant Thompson, I need to understand the medical procedures you performed. I'm seeing surgical work that's normally done only in Level 1 trauma centers. Maria provided detailed briefings on each of her critical patients, explaining the procedures she had performed and the current status of each soldier. Dr. Walsh was amazed by the thoroughness of the care and the sophistication of the surgical techniques. Sergeant, I've been practicing emergency medicine for 8 years, and I'm not sure I could have accomplished what you did under these conditions. This is going to change how we think about field medical capabilities. The evacuation proceeded smoothly, with each patient being loaded into appropriate medical vehicles with continued monitoring and care. Maria insisted on accompanying her 3 critical patients to ensure continuity of care during transport. As the convoy began the journey back to base, Hayes took a moment to reflect on what she had witnessed. She had led dozens of rescue operations throughout her career, but she had never seen anything like Maria Thompson's performance. The young sergeant had single-handedly prevented a military disaster from becoming a tragedy. Morrison, riding in one of the medical vehicles, was already planning his official report. Thompson, you know you're going to receive significant recognition for what you've accomplished. This kind of performance doesn't go unnoticed at higher levels of command. Maria was focused on monitoring her patients during transport, but she appreciated the recognition. Sir, I just hope this helps improve medical training and equipment for combat medics. If we can develop better field surgical capabilities, we can save more lives in situations like this. The convoy made excellent time on the improved roads, and within 4 hours, They were approaching the main military hospital facility. Advanced trauma teams were standing by to receive the wounded soldiers and provide definitive medical care. As they arrived at the hospital, Maria finally allowed herself to feel the exhaustion that had been building for over 24 hours. She had successfully evacuated every single soldier under her care, and all of them were going to make full recoveries. Walsh approached her as they unloaded the last patient. "Sergeant Thompson, I want you to know that word of your performance has already reached Washington. You're going to be asked to brief senior medical officers on your procedures and recommend changes to field medical protocols." Maria smiled tiredly. The mission was finally complete, but she was beginning to realize that her actions over the past day would have implications far beyond the immediate rescue. She had proven that extraordinary medical care was possible in the most challenging circumstances, and that achievement would influence military medicine for years to come. But for now, she was simply grateful that every soldier was safely home. 3 weeks later, Sergeant Maria Thompson found herself in a conference room at the Pentagon, facing a panel of the military's most senior medical officers. The mahogany table was surrounded by generals, colonels, and distinguished civilian doctors who had spent years developing military medical protocols. All of them wanted to understand how a combat medic had performed surgical procedures that challenged the limits of field medicine. General Patricia Reynolds, the Army's Surgeon General, opened the session. "Sergeant Thompson, we've reviewed your medical reports and interviewed your patients. What you accomplished appears to be unprecedented in military medical history. We'd like you to walk us through your decision-making process." Maria had spent the past 3 weeks recovering from the physical and emotional stress of the mission, while also preparing detailed reports on every procedure she had performed. She had been promoted to Staff Sergeant and awarded the Distinguished Service Cross, but the recognition felt less important than the opportunity to improve medical training for other combat medics. "Ma'am, everything I did was based on the training I received, but I had to adapt those procedures to the resources and conditions available. The key was recognizing that standard evacuation timelines couldn't save the most critical patients." Dr. Colonel James Mitchell, one of the military's top trauma surgeons, leaned forward. "Sergeant, the emergency cranial decompression you performed on Staff Sergeant Chen is a procedure we typically require 2 years of specialized neurosurgical training to authorize. How did you develop the confidence to attempt it?" "Sir, the training clearly indicated that without intervention, Chen would die. The procedure was dangerous, but certain death seemed like a worse outcome than the risks of attempting surgery." General Reynolds nodded approvingly. "That's exactly the kind of battlefield judgment we want to encourage. But we need to understand how to train other medics to make similar decisions safely." The session continued for 4 hours, with Maria providing detailed explanations of each medical procedure, her resource management, and her patient prioritization decisions. The military medical establishment was recognizing that combat conditions sometimes required field medics to perform at levels far beyond their traditional training. Meanwhile, back at the base hospital in Afghanistan, the soldiers from Convoy Delta 7 were making remarkable recoveries. Private Kim had undergone additional surgery to repair some minor complications from his initial field treatment, but doctors confirmed that Maria's emergency procedures had saved his life and prevented any long-term damage. Sergeant Torres was walking without assistance and had been cleared to return to limited duty. The complex leg reconstruction Maria had performed had been so successful that he was expected to make a complete recovery without any permanent disability. Staff Sergeant Chen, the brain injury patient, had shown no negative effects from his emergency cranial decompression. Military neurologists confirmed that Maria's field surgery had been technically perfect and had prevented potentially fatal brain damage. Lieutenant Colonel Hayes had submitted a comprehensive after-action report that praised both the convoy's performance under extreme conditions and Maria's extraordinary medical care. The report was being studied by military strategists as an example of how small unit leadership and individual expertise could overcome apparently impossible circumstances. Morrison, now fully recovered from his shoulder wound, had been promoted to Sergeant First Class and was being considered for advancement to Warrant Officer. His leadership during the crisis had been exemplary, but he consistently directed credit to Maria's medical care and the outstanding performance of his soldiers. Back in the Pentagon conference room, the discussion had moved from Maria's specific procedures to the broader implications for military medical training. "Sergeant Thompson," General Reynolds said, "we're considering establishing a new advanced field surgery training program based on your experiences. Would you be willing to help develop the curriculum and serve as an instructor?" Maria had been hoping for exactly this opportunity. "Yes, ma'am. I believe we can train combat medics to handle much more complex procedures than current protocols allow." The key is simulation training under stress conditions and better field surgical equipment. Dr. Colonel Sarah Patterson, who specialized in military medical research, had been taking extensive notes throughout the session. Sergeant, your resource management was particularly impressive. You performed multiple major surgeries with supplies designed for basic trauma care. How do we improve field medical kits? Ma'am, we need portable surgical instruments designed specifically for field conditions, better lighting systems, and improved anesthetics that work effectively in combat environments. Most importantly, we need communications equipment that allows field medics to consult with surgeons during complex procedures. The discussion continued for another hour, covering topics from equipment development to training modifications to protocol changes. By the end of the session, it was clear that Maria's actions had initiated a comprehensive review of military medical capabilities. General Reynolds concluded the meeting with an announcement that surprised everyone in the room. Sergeant Thompson, based on your performance and your recommendations today, you're being assigned to lead a new advanced field medical training unit. You'll have the authority to develop new training protocols, test equipment modifications, and establish field surgical capabilities throughout the military medical system. Maria felt overwhelmed by the responsibility but excited about the opportunity to improve medical care for future soldiers. Thank you, ma'am. I won't let you down. 6 months later, the Advanced Field Medical Training Unit was operational at Fort Sam Houston, with Maria serving as its chief instructor. The program was attracting combat medics from throughout the military who wanted to develop enhanced surgical capabilities. The new training included advanced trauma surgery, field anesthesia techniques, improvised surgical procedures, and crisis resource management. Students learned to perform complex medical procedures under simulated combat conditions, using equipment that had been redesigned based on Maria's recommendations. The first class of graduates was deployed to Afghanistan and immediately proved the value of the enhanced training. Field medical capabilities improved dramatically, and casualty survival rates reached their highest levels in military history. Private Kim, now fully recovered, had requested assignment to the Advanced Field Medical Training Unit as a student. Doc, you saved my life out there. I want to learn how to do the same for other soldiers. Sergeant Torres had also requested medical training and was considering a career change to become a combat medic. After what I saw you accomplish, I want to be able to help people the way you helped us. Staff Sergeant Chen had returned to full duty as a convoy navigator, but frequently visited the training unit to speak with students about the importance of advanced field medical capabilities. Sergeant Thompson didn't just save my life, he would tell the classes. She saved all of our lives by refusing to accept that the situation was impossible. The story of Convoy Delta 7 had become legendary throughout the military. Maria's actions were studied in leadership courses, medical training programs, and strategic planning sessions. The mission had demonstrated that individual expertise and determination could overcome seemingly impossible circumstances. Morrison, now a warrant officer, served as a guest lecturer at various military schools. But he always emphasized that the real hero of the story was Maria Thompson. We had good soldiers and good leadership, he would tell audiences, but we had an extraordinary medic who refused to let anyone die on her watch. Lieutenant Colonel Hayes had been promoted to full colonel and was commanding a major rescue operations unit. She frequently cited the Convoy Delta 7 mission as an example of how effective coordination between field units and rescue operations could achieve remarkable results. 1 year after the ambush, Maria received a letter from every soldier who had been wounded in the convoy. They had organized a reunion and wanted her to attend as their guest of honor. The letter read in part, Staff Sergeant Thompson, you gave us more than medical care that day in the mountains. You gave us hope when the situation seemed hopeless, skill when expertise was desperately needed, and leadership when we needed someone to show us that survival was possible. Because of you, 37 soldiers came home to their families. Because of you, military medicine has advanced in ways that will save countless lives in the future. Because of you, we learned that ordinary people can accomplish extraordinary things when they refuse to accept defeat. Maria kept the letter on her desk at the Advanced Field Medical Training Unit, where it served as a daily reminder of why her work was important. She had proven that combat medics could perform at levels previously thought impossible, and her legacy was ensuring that future medics would have the training and equipment to save lives under any circumstances. The mission that had begun with a wrong turn and a devastating ambush had become a story of human determination, medical innovation, and military excellence. Maria Thompson had arrived as a combat medic and had become a legend, but more importantly, she had changed military medicine forever. The mountains of Afghanistan still echoed with the sounds of conflict, but somewhere in those peaks was a place where one medic had proven that no situation is truly hopeless, no challenge is impossible to overcome, and no life is too difficult to save. That place had become a symbol of what soldiers could accomplish when they refused to surrender to impossible circumstances. And in training facilities around the world, new combat medics were learning the techniques and developing the confidence to follow in Maria Thompson's footsteps, ensuring that her legacy would continue to save lives for generations to come.